Amidst the chaos and uncertainty of our world, I often find myself looking off into the starry night sky and marveling at the vastness of space. It's hard to believe that we are really alone in this experience, and that there must be something else out there. I often wonder what we might find out there. Some things may be helpful and bring us joy, while others may be a threat to our well-being. Who knows, maybe one day we'll get to find out. Our first story of the night is titled The Lights Above New Hope. Bill and Tammy had a feeling something was not right. They had heard the rumors that had been circulating around town about strange lights in the forest at the end of the old Jones Road. Despite the fear that was slowly creeping up their spines, they had to know what was going on in their once peaceful town. They packed up their car and drove out to investigate. As they got closer and closer to the mysterious light, they could feel the tension in the air thickening. The further they drove, the more eerie the forest became, with trees standing deathly still, and no signs of life. Eventually, they arrived at the spot they thought was the closest to the light and decided they would venture into the forest. With trembling hands, they grabbed their flashlights and stepped out of the car, heading towards the unknown. As they walked, they heard strange noises coming from the trees. It made them both jump, but they kept going, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. The darkness seemed to swallow them whole as they trudged through the forest. The only thing illuminating their path was coming from the strange lights that seemed to be getting brighter, and brighter the closer they drew to their destination. They felt a strange energy pulsing through them, and they were filled with a sense of dread and terror. Their fragile courage kept them going, though, and they eventually found themselves in a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a strange object that they couldn't identify, but it was glowing with a soft light, and they could feel a magnetic force pulling them towards it. They approached cautiously, but they couldn't resist the pull any longer. As they got closer, they could see that it was a spacecraft of some kind. The craft was emitting a low hum and seemed to be emanating an aura of some type. They were scared, but their curiosity was stronger, and they felt compelled to investigate further. As they got closer, the lights from the craft became more intense. The air around them seemed to crackle with electricity, and the feeling of dread and terror was palpable. They were terrified, but they knew that they had to keep going. They stepped closer to the craft, and suddenly the lights went out, plunging them into complete darkness. They were lost and didn't know where to go or what to do. But then the craft began to glow again, and they could feel a strange energy emanating from it. It was clear that this UFO was the source of the disappearances they had been investigating, and that it was the key to understanding what was happening. With trembling hands, they touched the craft and felt a rush of energy course through their bodies. They had found the answers they were in search of, but they had no idea what they were in for. Tammy could feel something sinister staring at her from behind. Fearfully, she slowly put her hand on Bill's arm to alert him that they were being watched. They slowly turned around and were met with an unimaginable sight. Surrounding them were alien creatures, both menacing and revolting. Though they were only about 5 feet in height, their eyes were large and black, void of any soul. The creatures began walking towards Bill and Tammy, hunting them like prey. Tammy screamed in pure terror as they grabbed her and Bill. They dragged them onto their spacecraft. The exterior was cold and metallic, whilst the interior seemed to be a flesh-like substance. The walls were pulsating and covered in slimy, disgusting ooze. It was as if the creatures were an extension of the spacecraft itself. The duo screamed as they were taken down a hallway into the center of this living alien machine. It was a large, circular room. These space monsters threw Tammy against the wall before turning to Bill, who attempted to fight back, but his efforts were futile. The creatures seemed to be drawing closer, threatening to end their lives. Bill and Tammy could feel the darkness closing in around them, with no hope of escape. Bill and Tammy felt a wave of terror wash over them as the alien beings threw them against the wall. The walls of this alien ship seemed to be alive, and it was slowly devouring Bill and Tammy. In a matter of moments, only their eyes remained uncovered, and then the aliens quickly left the room. Suddenly, a bright light filled the room, and both of them could feel a jolt throughout their bodies. They realized that the aliens were using their life force to power the ship. As they looked around the room, they were horrified to see the eyes of the missing townspeople, all filled with panic and fear. This was their end. Another jolt came over their bodies, and the spaceship began to lift off the ground. Bill and Tammy could feel the ship vibrating, and they knew that they had no way of escaping. With a feeling of dread, they watched as the ship left the planet, and their town shrunk away until it was nothing but a faint glimmer in the night sky. The thought of what could come from outer space is one of our greatest fears. We have managed to protect ourselves here on Earth, but the vastness of the universe makes us terribly vulnerable to whatever may lurk beyond our planet's borders. Our ignorance of what lies beyond leaves us exposed and powerless against any potential threats. Our next alien abduction story is titled A Tough Day at the Office. Lisa had been working late at the office, pushing her tired body beyond its limits. As she slowly made her way towards the bus stop, the darkness of the night seemed to be swallowing her whole. She could feel a strange presence behind her, something she couldn't explain, something that made her heart race. She decided to take the 15-minute walk home instead of waiting for the bus. As she walked, Lisa felt as if something was watching her, sending chills down her spine. Her heart was thudding in her chest, and her skin was crawling with fear. She glanced around her, but there was nothing to be seen. Suddenly, the darkness seemed to be closing in on her, like a thick blanket of terror. Her feet felt like lead. It felt like she was walking through a never-ending abyss. She was determined not to let fear take over and kept walking, hoping the feeling would pass. Lisa couldn't believe her eyes. There, in the night sky, was something she had never seen before, and it was like nothing she had ever seen in her life. The object was glowing and hovering in midair, and it was emitting an eerie light that sent a chill down Lisa's spine. She couldn't take her eyes off of it as she stood there in shock and disbelief. Suddenly, the object moved closer, and Lisa could hear a low humming sound emanating from it. She felt a sudden wave of fear wash over her as the object seemed to be coming closer and closer. She tried to run away, but her feet felt like they were glued to the ground. The humming sound grew louder, and the object moved closer and closer to Lisa. She felt like she was about to faint, and then, before she knew it, the object was right in front of her, hovering and glowing with a bright light. Lisa felt a wave of terror and panic rush over her as she stared in horror at the mysterious object. Lisa screamed in terror as a bright white light engulfed her. She felt her body completely immobilized, as if she were trapped in an invisible force field. She could feel herself being lifted off the ground, as if something was pulling her up into the sky. The next thing Lisa knew, she was inside a spacecraft, the door beneath her having closed. She screamed and cried, desperately trying to get up, but her body was disoriented from the incredible speed at which the ship was moving. Lisa looked around wildly, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar craft. She heard a voice speaking in a language she didn't understand, and she could feel alien eyes on her. She had been abducted by aliens. Lisa was filled with a deep dread as she realized her situation. She was completely helpless and didn't know what the aliens wanted with her. She was terrified and wanted nothing more than to escape, but she was stuck in the spacecraft, which seemed to be heading further and further away from Earth. Lisa curled up in a ball and began to cry, her fear and desperation overwhelming her. She had no idea what was going to happen to her, and the thought of being taken away from her home planet was almost too much to bear. Lisa felt the cold reptilian hands grab her from behind. She screamed in terror as they dragged her down a hall, their grip around her arms like iron shackles. She pleaded and begged for mercy, but the aliens paid no attention to her cries. They finally stopped in front of a large metallic table. She was thrown onto it, her body trembling with fear. The aliens began to scan her body with a variety of instruments, each one of them emitting a different colored light. The scans seemed to last forever, and Lisa felt completely powerless as she lay there, unable to move or escape. She screamed for them to stop, for them to let her go, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Suddenly, one of the aliens injected her with a liquid. Within seconds, Lisa felt the world around her fading away. She had been abducted, and she had no idea what lay ahead. Lisa awoke in her bed in a panic, her heart pounding in her chest. She was trembling with fear as her mind raced. Had she really been abducted by aliens? She asked herself this over and over. Lisa then got up from her bed and went to the bathroom to splash some cold water on her face. As she looked in the mirror, her eyes widened in horror. She could see the bruises on her arms and neck where they had grabbed her. It was true, she had been taken by those things. As she felt the bruised areas of her arms, she felt something small and foreign implanted beneath her skin. What had they done to her? The fear and confusion Lisa felt was overwhelming. She had no idea what the aliens had done to her or why they had taken her. All she could do was wait and hope that she would soon find out. She lay in bed for hours, her mind spinning with questions and possibilities, until finally the sun began to rise. As the first rays of light streamed through the window, Lisa realized that she had to find out what the aliens had done to her. She took a deep breath and prepared herself for whatever may come. With a determination she never knew she had, Lisa set out to discover the truth of her abduction. For many people who have been abducted by aliens, they live in fear of being judged by their loved ones and the possibility of being taken again by these mysterious space creatures. These individuals are often too scared to share their stories, leaving them feeling isolated and unheard. But it doesn't have to be that way. Sharing your story can help you feel supported and understood, and can provide a sense of relief knowing that you are not alone in this experience. Our next abduction story is titled What Happened to Our Boy Tommy. Tommy was a normal 15-year-old boy living in a small rural town. He had a loving family, a few good friends, and a stable home life. Everything seemed to be going well for him. But then the nightmares started. Every night, Tommy was tormented by terrible visions of 3 gray aliens. They would appear in his bedroom, encircle his bed, their wide black eyes boring into his soul. He was powerless to stop them. He would scream and plead with them to go away, but they would not listen. The visions kept getting worse. Soon, the aliens were speaking to him in a strange language he could not understand. The nightmares kept coming, and Tommy was getting more and more desperate. He started to fear he was going mad. Tommy had been having vivid nightmares every night for weeks. Every night he would wake up screaming, his heart beating fast and his skin covered in cold sweat. He had tried to tell his parents about the nightmares, but each time he was too scared. The nightmares always included the same thing, aliens circling his bed, their glowing eyes glaring at him. No matter how hard he screamed, they wouldn't leave. One night, Tommy finally mustered up the courage to tell his parents about the nightmares he was having. His parents could see the fear in his eyes, and they immediately took him to the family doctor. The doctor listened to Tommy's story and then told his parents that it sounded like he was suffering from a bad case of sleep paralysis, a condition in which the body becomes paralyzed during sleep, and the person is unable to move or call out for help. This would explain why his parents couldn't hear him scream and why he was having visions of aliens in his nightmares. The doctor prescribed Tommy some sleeping pills to help him stay asleep throughout the night and told his parents to keep a close eye on him. Tommy was relieved to know what was causing his nightmares, and he was happy to finally have his parents understand what he was going through. But he still couldn't shake the feeling of fear that came over him every night. Tommy had been struggling with fear for weeks, fear of the dark and fear of the unknown. The sleeping pills seemed to be working. He slept through the night and the nightmares of aliens slowly disappeared. Night after night, he became more and more comfortable with sleeping again. He slowly started to feel like himself again, but the thought of sleep still brought on feelings of anxiety. Tommy was now scared of what he might not be seeing in the night while he took the pills. Tommy's parents had grown increasingly concerned about their son's bizarre behavior that seemed to be starting up again. He had become increasingly erratic, often talking about aliens and strange creatures coming into his room at night. His parents had tried to reassure him that it was simply sleep paralysis, but Tommy seemed unshakable in his conviction. One night, Tommy decided to take his sleeping pill before turning in, hoping that it would help him to get a good night's rest. His parents tucked him in, said goodnight, and headed off to bed. The morning came and Tommy had still not come down for breakfast. His parents went upstairs to check on him and were immediately filled with dread. His room was a mess, the bed sheets were thrown to the floor, and it was clear that a struggle had occurred. But most frighteningly, Tommy was nowhere to be found. The police were called and a search began, but no trace of Tommy was ever found. It seemed as though he had been taken by the aliens he had been so afraid of. For years, Tommy's parents searched for any sign of their son, but to no avail. They never saw Tommy again, and the mysterious disappearance of their son left them with an overwhelming sense of sadness and fear. They would never know what happened to their son that fateful night, only that he had been taken away by something that he feared so much. The fear of darkness and being taken is deeply embedded in the human psyche, which is why the thought of alien abductions feels so real and terrifying. This fear is instinctual and can be traced to our ancestors' survival instincts that evolved to keep them safe from harm. It is a primal fear, one that may have been with us since the dawn of time. It may also be rooted in a truth we don't want to think about today. This next story about being abducted by aliens is titled Trouble at the Larsons' Farm. Jenny and Jim Larson had been dreaming of moving their 2 kids out to the country for years. They wanted to give their children the opportunity to grow up away from the hustle and bustle of the city life. One day, after much deliberation, they decided to make the move. As they packed up their belongings and loaded the car, they couldn't help but feel a little bit scared. What if they couldn't make it work? What if they found out the country life was not for them? When they finally arrived, they were amazed to find a small, quaint community nestled in the countryside. It was the perfect place to raise their kids, and their 2 children, Bobby and Jamie, were absolutely thrilled. They scrambled out of the car, eager to explore their new surroundings. As Jenny and Jim watched their children happily playing in the grass, they felt a wave of relief wash over them. The Larson family had just finished unpacking their belongings after a long move, and they were all tired and eager to go to bed. As they settled into the old farmhouse, they were already beginning to feel as if it was becoming their home. However, just as they were about to drift off to sleep, a loud banging noise echoed throughout the house. Bang, bang, bang echoed throughout their old home. The Larsons all sat up in shock, a chill running down their spines. It sounded like someone was trying to break in. Frightened, the Larsons all huddled together trying to come up with a plan. Suddenly, the noise stopped, and all was quiet again. Even so, the Larsons stayed up all night, eyes wide open in fear. When morning came, the Larsons emerged from their bedrooms and cautiously explored the house, each step echoing in the eerie silence. As they reached the kitchen, they found the back door wide open, the screen door blowing in the wind. Bang, bang, bang. The door crashed against the exterior of the home. They all let out a sigh of relief as Jim announced that he knew what he had to fix first. It only took a couple of nights, though, for more strange events to start happening at the Larsons' new farm. On the 2nd or 3rd night after moving in, both of their children said something unsettling to their parents. They had each heard a strange humming coming from outside and had woken in the middle of the night to find their bedrooms filled with a dull blue light. It wasn't long before the Larsons started to notice strange things happening around their new home. For starters, the humming seemed to get louder and more intense each night. Every time the Larsons went outside, they were met with a strange chill that seemed to have no source. As time went on, the Larsons also started to notice other strange occurrences. Animals around the farm seemed to be acting in an abnormal manner, and the lights around the farmhouse seemed to flicker on and off in unison. Jim was completely exhausted, but he knew he had to do something. He had to figure out what was making the humming noise and the strange flashing blue lights that he had been seeing in his children's bedroom. He told Jenny and the kids that he was going to take a trip into town to get some camera equipment so he could get to the bottom of the strange occurrences. Even though he felt safe in the house at night, he was still scared. He purchased a couple of cameras and then returned home. Once back, he set up the cameras around the yard in an attempt to capture a glimpse of what was causing his family so much terror. The night was dark and silent, except for the occasional breeze through the trees. Jim waited, feeling more and more exhausted as the minutes ticked away. Suddenly, a loud humming noise filled the air, and the blue light shone into the children's bedroom, brighter than ever before. Jim watched in horror as the mysterious figure kept circling his property. He had heard strange humming and saw eerie blue lights coming from outside, but he had no idea what was happening. As the alien moved closer, Jim could make out its features, tall, around 6 feet, and clearly not from this world. The creature seemed to be searching for something as it tried each door, peering inside windows, and running its long, alien fingers along the walls. The pale blue light that followed it seemed to dance in the night sky. Jim felt like he was in some sort of science fiction movie, but then he realized that this was actually happening. He was scared, but he had to do something. He stepped out of his door and yelled, "Stop." The alien froze in place and stared at him, its eyes glowing in a way that made Jim's skin crawl. It slowly backed away, never taking its eyes off of Jim. Jim had never been so scared in his life. He could feel his heart beating wildly in his chest as he watched the mysterious creature look right through him with an unsettling intensity. It let out a loud screech that sent chills down Jim's spine. He was frozen in place, unable to move as the creature advanced closer and closer to him. Suddenly, he noticed a spacecraft hovering above him and a beam of light emanating from it. To his horror, the beam had locked onto him, and before he could react, the beam had already begun to draw him into the craft. The tall alien leapt towards the beam, and the two of them disappeared into the night sky. Jim was left alone with only the sound of his fear-stricken heart pounding in his ears. He had no idea what was going to happen to him, but he was sure it was not going to be pleasant. Jenny watched the recordings of that night, as if she was looking for some trace of Jim. She rewinded and fast-forwarded the footage until her eyes became blurry, but all she saw was the same thing. The figure of her husband being taken away by some hideous space creature. It had been 2 weeks since the night Jim disappeared, and the search party had been unsuccessful in finding any trace of him. Jenny was desperate and her heart was heavy with worry and guilt. What if she had done something differently? What if she had made a move to protect Jim? Jenny felt helpless and scared, not knowing what happened to Jim. The creature was so fast, so powerful, and so terrifying. Was it still out there? Was it still looking for more victims? Questions raced through her mind as she watched the footage for the 100th time. She tried to make sense of it, to find an answer. But all she saw was a dark, cold, and empty sky, with no sign of Jim. Jenny felt so scared, so alone. She felt like she was being haunted by the creature, like it was still searching for her. She shivered at the thought and tears rolled down her cheeks. But what she couldn't shake was the feeling that Jim was still out there, somewhere in the vastness of space. Maybe he wasn't lost forever, and that thought gave her a bit of hope. Jenny would never forget that night, and the fear of never finding Jim would haunt her forever. But she would never give up hope, and every night she would look up at the stars, searching for some sign of Jim. The thought of someone we love being taken away from us in the darkness of night is an unimaginable horror. Compounding our own fear of being abducted ourselves is the fear that others will be taken. It's a terrifying prospect to think of our loved ones being taken away by an unknown and uncontrollable force. We can't help but worry that one day we may not be able to protect them. Our next haunting tale about alien encounters is titled The Fishing Trip. Brian and Jeremy had been going on fishing trips with their dad since they were little. The trips had been a tradition, one that they looked forward to all year long. This year was going to be different, however, as their dad had passed away in the winter. For the first time, the two brothers would be going fishing without their father. The brothers decided to go to their favorite fishing spot, the one they had gone to every year with their dad. When they arrived, the memories of their father flooded back. The laughter, the stories, the competitions, the shared meals, all of it came back to them in that moment. The brothers decided to take a moment to remember their father. They both shed some tears, but then held each other close, finding strength in one another. Brian and Jeremy were out fishing their favorite spot on the lake when their boat was suddenly engulfed in a bright white light. Every muscle in their bodies froze as the mysterious light lifted them out of the boat. As they hovered in midair, the brothers could see a massive metallic flying disc above them. The light was so blinding that neither of them could move or speak. They just stared at each other, unable to comprehend what was happening. Before they knew it, the two of them were being pulled up into the spacecraft. As they flew through the air, the brothers felt an overwhelming sense of fear and panic. Their minds raced as they tried to make sense of what was happening. They were both in a complete state of shock. The next thing they knew, they were inside the spacecraft. Everything around them was so unfamiliar and strange. There were blinking lights and strange machines everywhere. The brothers were taken to a room where they were strapped to chairs and subjected to various tests. They were unable to comprehend what was happening or why they were being taken. All they knew was that they had been abducted by an alien spacecraft. The tests went on for what felt like hours, and the brothers were filled with dread. Brian's eyes widened in terror as he felt two large and powerful hands grab his arms and drag him away from the spacecraft's operating room. He could hear the cries of his brother Jeremy becoming more intense as he was dragged further down the hallway. The screams seemed to reverberate through the corridors, echoing off the walls and reverberating in Brian's ears. Brian was helpless to stop the aliens, unable to think of a way to escape their grasp. His mind was filled with dread as he thought of the fate that awaited his brother. He felt himself fading, and soon he was completely overcome with fear and darkness. The last thing Brian heard as he drifted off into unconsciousness were his brother's screams, growing louder and louder as the aliens pulled him further away. He knew he was powerless to help his brother, and the fear of the unknown was too much for him to bear. He could only hope his brother would make it out alive. Brian awoke in a field some time later. He was both alone and afraid. He was relieved to be alive and free from the torture he was subjected to on the spacecraft by the aliens. He shouted for his brother Jeremy but heard no response. Fear crept into his heart and he knew he had to get back to safety. He found his way back to the lake and was able to recover the boat they had been in earlier. With a trembling hand, he pulled it back to the dock and ran to his truck. He drove as fast as he could, his mind racing with terror as he mentally prepared himself for whatever awaited him. He drove to the police station and frantically pounded on the door. To his relief, the police answered and took him inside. As he recounted his story, they looked at him with a mix of disbelief and horror. "Aliens, are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure," Brian replied, his voice shaking with fear. He told them everything that had happened and the police immediately began to investigate. To this day, Brian still makes the trip to the lake every year, hoping to find his lost brother Jeremy. He knows that his brother has been missing for years, and the police had initially suspected him of being involved in Jeremy's disappearance. But eventually, they had no choice but to drop the charges. Still, Brian can't help but feel uneasy every time he visits the lake. The memories of his brother come flooding back, and the thought of never knowing what happened to him is a scary one. He can't help but feel that his brother is still out there somewhere, and he's determined to find him. But every year, the search yields no results. Brian's efforts are met with silence and the same unanswered questions, and he's left feeling more desperate and scared than ever. He's almost resigned himself to the fact that he may never know what happened to his brother. As the years go by, the only thing that keeps Brian going is the hope that one day he'll get the answers he's looking for. He doesn't know if it'll ever happen, but he's determined to keep searching. Even if the odds are against him, he knows that he'll never give up on his brother. So, every year, Brian makes the trip to the lake. He'll never stop looking for Jeremy, no matter how scary the search might be. The moments we spend alone, in deep contemplation, can open up a world of fear and uncertainty. As we wander the dark corners of our minds, the unknown can seem overwhelming. Though it can be a calming and peaceful experience, at times, it can also be truly terrifying. Our next story is titled The Long Ride Home. It was a dark and stormy night as Mary drove home from work. She had been working late and was looking forward to a peaceful evening at home. Out of the corner of her eye, Mary noticed a strange light in the sky. At first, she thought it was just a passing airplane. But as she drove closer, the light grew brighter and larger. It looked like a UFO. Mary's heart started to race as she accelerated her car. The alien spacecraft began to follow her, slowly gaining on her. She could feel its presence looming over her vehicle. Mary's heart was pounding in her chest as she drove faster and faster. Her eyes darted back and forth, desperately searching for a place to hide. But the alien spacecraft was relentless and kept chasing her. Mary drove the long road to her home, the fear gripping her heart like a vice. Every mile seemed to stretch out for an eternity, and her mind raced with fear and despair. The UFO had been following her for miles now, hovering silently above and watching her with its eerie red eyes. She had no idea what it wanted, but she knew she wanted nothing more than to get home. Suddenly, her car jolted and the engine died. Mary's heart skipped a beat as she realized she was stranded in the middle of the country road. The UFO descended, its blinding light illuminating the area around her. Panic began to take over her body, her hands shaking as she looked around in terror. Just then, she heard a voice in her head. "Mary, run!" Mary's heart pounded as she snapped out of her state of shock. She could feel the terror coursing through her veins as she opened the car door and ran into the woods. The main light from the UFO was scanning the forest, desperately trying to locate her. Every time the light found her, she screamed in fear and ran deeper into the forest. The trees provided her with some cover, but she knew it wasn't enough. She could hear the whirling sound of the UFO above her, searching for her. She kept running and running, not daring to look back. Mary ran as fast as she could, but it was no use. The UFO was hunting her through the forest like a dog chasing a rabbit. She screamed in terror as it got closer and closer. No matter how fast she ran, the UFO seemed to be gaining on her. As Mary ran, she felt a chill down her spine. The UFO was unrelenting. She had no idea what it wanted with her. Her heart raced faster and faster as she thought about the possibilities. Suddenly, the UFO shot a beam of light towards her. Mary screamed and ran faster, but the UFO was too fast. It was about to catch her when suddenly a bright light illuminated the forest. It was a highway ahead of her. Mary watched in horror as a car stopped in the middle of the road. A man who had been driving got out, and Mary could see the white light emanating from the UFO that had been chasing her. Instantly, the man was engulfed in the light and started to float up towards the UFO. Mary screamed for the man to run, but it was too late. He disappeared inside the UFO, and the craft immediately flew away into the night sky. The darkness was now complete, and Mary was left standing alone in the middle of the highway. She felt a chill run down her spine, and a deep sense of dread filled her heart. She had no idea what was happening and no way of knowing what the future held. As Mary stood in the darkness, she could only hope that the man had escaped the UFO and managed to survive. She closed her eyes and silently prayed that she wouldn't be the next one taken from our world. One of the biggest fears we all share is what would happen if our planet were invaded by aliens. Would we be able to survive and protect our loved ones? We can only hope that we never have to find out. But in the event of an alien invasion, it's important to be prepared and ready to put up a fight. Knowing your environment and having a plan ready could make all the difference in protecting yourself and your loved ones. Our next tale of alien abduction is titled There Is Something About Mary. It was a beautiful fall morning, and Mary couldn't bear the thought of her dog spending another day cooped up in their home. She loaded up her car and drove an hour to a nearby national park. The sun was shining, and it seemed like the perfect way to spend the day with her beloved pet. But something was off. Mary couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. Her dog was acting strange as well, barking and growling at the trees as if something was lurking in the shadows. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as Mary's heart raced faster and faster. Mary's grip on the leash tightened as she walked faster, casting glances over her shoulder every few steps. The feeling of being watched was strong, like an invisible force was following them, getting closer and closer. Her heart pounded in her chest as she kept walking, trying to make it to the car before something happened. But it was too late. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind a tree, blocking their path. Mary's blood ran cold as the creature advanced towards her and her dog. She knew in her gut that this thing was following them the entire time. Mary gasped in terror as the figure lunged out of the darkness towards her. She knew with a sinking feeling that this was not from our planet. It was an otherworldly creature, its glowing eyes and distorted body a stark contrast to Mary's own. In a moment of terror, she felt the creature grab her arm, and she felt a sharp sudden pain as something on it pierced her skin. Mary felt her consciousness fading, and in the distance heard her dog whimpering in fear. The last thing she remembered was the sight of the alien, with its inhuman face and strange gray skin, hovering over her before she slipped away into darkness. The creature had come from a distant world, and it seemed intent on doing her harm. It was a menacing figure, its presence a reminder of the unknown and terrifying power of the universe. Mary was losing control over herself, and now an alien had come to take her place. The creature seemed to be aware of Mary's every move and thought, learning from its host with an icy, calculating manner. Mary tried to fight the creature, using all her strength, but it was no use. The creature had full control over her, and it was slowly taking away her very essence. This monster from outer space had no mercy, and it seemed to be relishing in its newfound power. It was only a matter of time before it had consumed all of Mary's memories, dreams, and her knowledge, leaving nothing behind but an empty shell of a person. Mary could hear the creature's voice in her head, a hauntingly sinister sound that echoed through her mind. The creature's words were cold and calculating, as it promised her a world of terror and misery. Mary felt a wave of horror wash over her as she realized the creature had the power to take away her life. She felt as if she was a prisoner, trapped in her own mind as the alien had taken full control over her body and thoughts. She was only a spectator to the horror that it was planning to inflict on the world. Mary could understand what the alien was planning, but was unable to stop it. Fear and dread ran through her veins as she felt the alien making her body walk through the deep woods of the national forest, with no regard for its host body. Tree branches cut into her arms as she walked, yet she could not stop. The alien then moved her body into an opening. Mary's heart raced as she watched thousands of people, all of which were under the control of other aliens. She could see the terror in their eyes and the desperation on their faces. This was the aliens' plan, and Mary was powerless to stop it. Her body was taken further into the depths of the forest until they reached a clearing. Mary could feel the aliens' excitement as it made her kneel down in the middle of the clearing. Suddenly, a bright light shone down from the sky and a loud voice boomed out, echoing throughout the forest. It was the aliens' master, come to take control of the thousands of poor souls now under its control. The voice commanded the humans to obey, and Mary watched in horror as the people bowed down before the aliens' master. She knew that she was powerless to stop it, and felt only fear and dread as the aliens' master took complete control of the crowd. He told them to go back to their lives as he would gather them all when he needed them. Mary walked back to her car in fear, her heart pounding in her chest. She could still feel the alien presence within her, and she felt the oppressive weight of an impending alien invasion. Everywhere she looked, she saw the same fear reflected in the eyes of those around her. The master alien's words echoed in her mind. When they were ready for a full-blown invasion, they would activate her and the others to assist the aliens in taking over the planet. Mary was terrified of what would come next. Would she be a pawn in the aliens' sinister plan? Would she be able to protect her family and friends from the impending terror that was to come? Mary tried to push these thoughts from her mind as she made her way back to her car. She had to stay focused and remain calm. As she opened her car door, she took a deep breath and tried to take in the reality of her situation. She had to stay strong and remain vigilant. Suddenly, the sky lit up with a brilliant flash of light. Mary watched in horror as thousands of alien spacecraft descended from the heavens, an army of unknown origin ready to take over the planet. Panic surged through her body as she watched the aliens begin their invasion. Mary had to act fast. She quickly jumped into her car and sped away, her heart racing with fear. She knew the only way to survive this onslaught was to remain vigilant and prepare for the worst. As she drove away, she could feel the alien presence lingering in her mind and body, a reminder of the nightmare that was about to unfold. The thought of an alien invasion tearing a family apart is truly a nightmare. The horror is intensified when a family is involved, as the bonds between them are deep and the potential consequences of such an attack would be devastating. Our worst fears of separation, loss, and chaos come to life in this nightmarish scenario. The next abduction story we have for you is titled "There is a Monster Outside My Window." The Johnson family had just settled in for the night when the power suddenly went out. The thunder and lightning storm that had been raging outside had finally knocked out the electricity in their area. The Johnsons were now forced to spend time together without any technology to keep them entertained. The family got creative and decided to play some board games together by candlelight. They laughed and shared stories as they played, deepening their bond and reminding them of how important family time can be. Once the board games were over, the family decided to get cozy and tell each other stories. As the night went on, everyone became tired and decided to go to bed. Barb and Tom Johnson tucked their son Jerry in and made their way to their room to go to bed. Almost instantly, they heard a blood-curdling scream come from their son's room. Barb and Tom rushed back to Jerry's room, only to find him trembling in fear. When asked what was wrong, he stammered out an almost incoherent story. He had seen a gray alien outside his window, with a large head and big black eyes. In an effort to calm his son down, Tom cautiously ventured towards the window and slowly opened the curtains. Just as he did, a violent flash of lightning illuminated the night sky, and a loud thunderclap echoed through the darkness. Suddenly, the glass in Jerry's window shattered, and Tom was dragged outside by the alien Jerry had described only moments earlier. Barb and young Jerry were both in shock and terrified for their lives. Just moments ago, they had watched in horror as their beloved Tom was pulled away from the window by an alien creature. The screams of Tom echoed through the night, and fear filled the air as another lightning flash illuminated the night sky. This was no ordinary storm. The eyes of more of these creatures could be seen lurking in the shadows. Barb and Jerry knew that they had to find a way to escape before these creatures made their way to the open window. The two of them quickly ran for the door, but before they could reach it, Barb felt a sharp pain in her arm. She had been grabbed by one of the creatures. Its long, bony fingers dug into her skin as it dragged her away from Jerry. Jerry ran after the creature, trying to free his beloved mother from its grasp, but it was too strong. He could only watch in horror as it disappeared into the night with her. All he could do was scream and cry out for her, but it was pointless. Barb was gone. Jerry was left alone in the darkness, and his heart was filled with fear. He had just witnessed the most terrifying thing he had ever seen, and he knew that he would never forget it. He had no idea what these creatures wanted or what they were capable of, but he knew that he had to get away. The morning came with a clearing sky, but Jerry's life had changed forever. As the sun rose, his parents were nowhere to be found. Young Jerry never saw his parents again. He never got over the fact that his parents had been so suddenly and mysteriously abducted by aliens on that stormy night. The thought of it was too much for his young mind to take. Even today, whenever it rains, Jerry can feel a coldness in his heart, knowing that his parents will never return. In our final story of the night titled Finding Others, we see why it is so important for alien abduction survivors to connect with people after their experiences. Many alien abduction survivors suffer in silence, afraid to tell their friends and family about the traumatic experience they have gone through. But it's important for those who have been taken to reach out and find support from others who understand what they have been through. By sharing stories and connecting with others who have experienced similar traumas, survivors can find comfort and strength in knowing that they are not alone. Abby was walking home from work one night, her mind filled with thoughts of the day's events. The sun had set and the sky was a deep blue, with just a few stars beginning to appear. Abby felt herself relax as she approached her block, looking forward to a nice, relaxing night. She had just finished her shift at the local diner and was looking forward to a hot shower and a good night's sleep. Little did she know that her life was about to take a drastic turn. As she walked, she noticed a strange light in the sky. It was a deep red color, and it seemed to be moving closer. As Abby watched, the light grew in size and intensity. She began to feel afraid, and she wanted to run away from it. But something inside her wouldn't let her leave. Instead, she stood there transfixed on the sidewalk. It was a bright, pulsing light that seemed to be coming closer and closer. It was then that she noticed a small, dark shape moving alongside it. The object grew larger and larger until Abby could see that it was a spacecraft of some kind. She knew in her heart that this wasn't an airplane or helicopter. What she was seeing defied any explanation she could come up with. Suddenly, the light descended and enveloped her in its glow. There was a moment of silence, and then Abby felt herself being lifted off the ground. She tried to scream but couldn't. She felt paralyzed from head to toe. Then came a strange buzzing sound that surrounded her and made her feel as if she were floating in space. She was sure these aliens were about to take her away. Abby felt herself being pulled into the ship, and then suddenly everything went black. When she regained consciousness, she was lying on a cold metal table in some kind of medical facility. There were strange creatures standing around her and staring at her with their large black eyes. They were much shorter than Abby, but they looked strong and powerful. They had large heads with two small nostrils on either side. Their mouths were very small, and their lips were thin and pale white. They almost looked like paper cutouts glued onto the face. The creatures wore tight-fitting black uniforms that covered every inch of their bodies and made them look like soldiers from outer space. She tried to move but couldn't. There were restraints holding her down. The aliens took her to their ship, where they subjected her to a series of tests and experiments. She was terrified. She had never felt so helpless in her entire life. Abby tried to scream for help, but no one came to rescue her. She felt herself fading away. She thought that maybe death would be better than this life of being experimented on by aliens. As she was lying on the table and fading away, Abby thought about her life. Abby had spent so much time being afraid of things that didn't exist. She had been too scared to explore the world and expand her mind. She felt like a fool for having wasted so many years of her life in this way. Abby thought about her friends and family. She wondered if they would miss her when she was gone. Abby had always felt like an outsider. No one seemed to understand her or appreciate all that she had done for them. She was terrified and confused, but she managed to keep her wits about her. Abby felt no pain but could tell they were doing some form of an operation on her. She could hear them talking to each other, but the language was strange and unrecognizable. Abby felt a sharp pain in her chest and then passed out. When she woke up, she was in a small room with no windows and only one door. The walls were made of metal and were painted white. There was a light hanging from the ceiling which gave off very little illumination. After what felt like an eternity, the aliens finally released her back to Earth not far from where she was abducted. She was in a daze and couldn't remember many details about the abduction. Abby went home and took a shower, trying to make sense of what had happened. When she woke up the next morning, she found small bruises on her body as well as an alien implant inside her chest. She decided to keep this a secret from her family, fearing that they would think she was crazy. She also didn't know what to do about the implant. She had no idea what purpose it served or whether removing it would cause any harm. She had survived her ordeal with the aliens, but the experience had changed her forever. She was no longer sure of who she was or what life had in store for her. She felt as though she were living in a dream or even a nightmare, but one thing was clear. Her abduction experience had changed her life forever. The woman who had been abducted by aliens was not alone. Abby was one of many people who had experienced alien abduction. Thousands of individuals have reported being taken by extraterrestrials at some point in their lives, with many claiming that they were subjected to painful medical procedures and experiments while aboard spacecrafts. Some witnesses say they were kept confined in rooms that resembled operating theaters, while others claim they were taken into small cubicles where strange devices were placed over their bodies. Abby was now more aware of the strange and mysterious forces that lurk in the shadows of our world. The experience changed her life. She began studying the phenomenon of alien abduction and was able to meet other people who had been through similar experiences. Abby realized that she wasn't alone, which comforted her greatly. She also learned that many of these individuals were still experiencing strange occurrences in their lives after being abducted. This led Abby to believe that there was a connection between the extraterrestrial beings and the humans that they had taken.